Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. I've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. It is the Sunday recap episode of everything that went on in the Big Ten. Got my guy, Zach Guggenheim of the Big Ten Football Talk podcast here with me, and special guest, Larry of Night Watch, the Rutgers podcast of the College Huddle. Larry, we had so many questions about this Rutgers team. We had to bring somebody on, and we had to hear the accent again, so we had to bring you back on. How you been, Larry?
I've been good, man. Good to see you guys here. If what Rutgers has one thing going for it, it's Larry K and my accent. I say I'll leave it there. Might not be a whole lot else going for it, but we got that. So I'm glad to be with you guys. And just so everybody out there listening knows, they asked me before the debacle on Saturday. Okay, so but we're going to talk about that too. So it's great to be with you guys. College Huddle obviously has been great. I've been having a lot of guests on every week from the different teams, so it's really facilitated that. I am going to write something for once now since preseason, so it'll be out on the College Huddle soon. I've been working on it. So it's great to be with you guys and just to touch base with everybody out there and just continue to be a part of the team.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, definitely go check out the College Huddle. We don't talk about the College Huddle a lot. We do try to run a promo or an ad for it every time we have an episode, but we don't talk about it enough. It has all the stuff you want, all the stuff you need. Our guy who runs the website for it, he said he was actually tracking CBS Sports at one point, and there was one week when we had more articles written than CBS Sports did altogether. So, like, if you ask me, there's a lot of content going on over there. There's a lot of stuff being posted, and you can read and have a whole lot of podcasts from awesome podcasters like Larry himself that you can get content from. So, Larry, I think we should start with this Rutgers team. All right. So, Rutgers loses 32-35. I tweeted during the game what happened to the Rutgers that I once loved because this just does not look like the Rutgers team that we saw the first 4 games of the season. I know injuries are definitely a factor. Kyle Monangai scored 3 touchdowns, so he's trying to do his part. But, I mean, from the Rutgers side of thing, Larry, what is going on right now with this Rutgers team?
They really seem rudderless. I mean, it's a combination of things, and it's hard because now myself and a few of the other, prominent journalists and podcasters out there speaking on Rutgers sports, we're kind of at a loss for words because this particular game, the offense gets going. Ethan Kaliakmanis doesn't have mind-blowing stats, but he moves the ball quite well. Some very nice throws. Some of the wide receivers, Dymere Miller, the Monmouth University transfer, who we've been expecting things from all season, comes up big. Some of the freshman receivers, KJ Duff, come up big. But the defense, obviously Kyle Monangai, you mentioned him already, 3 touchdowns, running, against a UCLA interior that really isn't bad, running and having his way with them on a lot of plays. The defense doesn't show up. Now, go 2 weeks ago in Nebraska, at Nebraska, the offense doesn't show up because the defense holds them to 14 points, and the offense can't score from the 2-yard line on 4 straight tries. And then Wisconsin was just a debacle. Look, when going into the game, I get the update that both our starting defensive ends were out. That's Aaron Lewis and Wesley Bailey. We already were banged up with Robert Longerbeam, the star corner, Tyreen Powell, a returning linebacker, one of the best players on the team, didn't play the previous week. Obviously, Mo Touré's been out. I'm not going to blame injuries all the time, though, because I think coaching has been suspect. I mean, game day coaching decisions have been, I'll tell you, they haven't been good since Vatek. We won the Virginia Tech game, but starting off that game, Rutgers should have ran away with the game. Not to take anything away from Vatek. They have some serious playmakers. They've since gone out and had a decent, I mean, they had a really good showing against Boston College recently. But Rutgers still dug itself into almost losing that game with some questionable coaching decisions. You see it again this week with just, and look, we can all judge it in hindsight. It's hard to do. Schiano's saying that he's looking at analytics. He's going for 2 at the beginning of the third quarter when we seem to really seize momentum. You don't get the 2-point conversion. He goes for it again late in the game. We don't get it again. And then later in the game, Hamilton comes down with a forced fumble and recovered fumble, and Rutgers scores to make the score 32-35. And had we simply kicked those 2 extra points, you could have gone for 2 there and tied it. Then again, had you made those 2-point conversions, you would have won the game there. End of the day, I think that what's going on with Rutgers, and it's a shame, is you look at the depth of the team. And when you have the injuries that they've had, there was a lot of fanfare about the returning seniors coming back to this, for this season. And without those guys, you still thought you had depth to step up because some of the highly touted recruits and people in the program were people you were excited to see. But if you really start to dissect it and you look at the 2022 class, which was probably Schiano's most exciting class, ranked in the 30s, a ton of four-star recruits, a ton of promise, 3 offensive linemen in that class medically retired. One of the best receivers didn't make it to campus. One of the better linebackers actually left the program. And you're starting to see that the depth simply does not hold up. But it's a combination of depth and coaching decisions. And I'll be honest with you, that Rutgers Schiano flair where guys are chopping the moment and going by that mantra and running off the field, making the chop signal, I don't see any of it. So it's just kind of an uninspired brand of football, to be honest with you. I don't know what happened in Nebraska, took the wind out of their sails. Wisconsin absolutely pummeled Rutgers at home. And then you have a great crowd. You have a UCLA team that has traveled all over the country this year, has not won a conference game up until now. And Rutgers, stumbles, and UCLA had more of this fire. I will leave it with this. The Washington game is their lone conference victory up to this point. And the Washington game, in hindsight, or even if you were watching the game live, there was a lot of mistakes Washington made in that game. Credit to Rutgers for capitalizing on their red zone trips that game. Credit to Rutgers for capitalizing on Washington's mistakes. But even with that game, there were issues there. And I'm disheartened, but I'm not necessarily surprised by it. I am surprised by how rudderless this program looks at this point in the season under Coach Schiano. I think it's something we're grappling with over in Jersey.
It's interesting, Larry, as you're talking, because one of the things that I was surprised to even read on X was people saying that it's time to fire Schiano, which I felt like that was pretty extreme, but I'm curious to hear your take on that take, because it is extreme, but to hear you talk about a rudderless program, that feels pretty ominous for Rutgers. What do you think?
I think if you go back to Schiano 1.0, I mean, a lot of people have you see him from a distance and there's a lot to like, and that's understandable. And even for Jersey people, there's a lot to like. There was a huge campaign. The governor got involved, everybody to get him hired when we got rid of Coach Ash, who was really one of the worst low points of the program under Ash. And I think what people are now kind of remembering is Coach Schiano got a bottom dwelling program who was new to trying to make it in big time sports to a memorable couple. Let's put it this way, a memorable season in 2006 that didn't win a championship, but got us ranked pretty high, 11-2, first bowl victory ever. And then subsequently had winning seasons and perennial bowl wins and perennial bowl appearances up until he left for the Buccaneers. But one thing that people even complained about in 1.0 was that we never got over that hump. We didn't win a share of the Big East title until 2012, which was under his successor, Kyle Flood, with a lot of his recruits. But still, and then we had a decent showing in the Big Ten 2014, also under Flood. People are kind of saying, well, he's a great guy to revive a program that's on life support, to build a culture that's respectable, where you're not embarrassed just to show up anymore. But is he the guy based on game day decisions to get us, over the hump to where we want to go? And really, some of the predictions we had on some of these shows that I did, is he the guy to get us there? Now, I don't know that that's a legitimate criticism. People are feeling pretty shellacked after the loss. What I'll say is this: it's a new world of college football. NIL is a big thing. Transfer portal is a big thing. Coach Schiano wants to develop guys from the high school ranks. I think it's a smart decision, given that Rutgers is going to have limited NIL funds. However, if you say you're going to develop the guys, you're going to go after the guys you want, you're going to make offers only to guys you want and you think you can develop, and then those guys don't seem to be developing when you need them, it's questionable. Now, here's the one last thing that I'd say about Schiano that I find perplexing. If you go back to when he got rehired in 2019, he brings in Sean Gleason, who's an innovative offensive coordinator. He goes out and gets Gavin Wimsatt, who's supposed to be a dual threat quarterback with a lot of athleticism. And people have long said that Rutgers is not going to line up in the trenches and pummel you helmet on helmet on the D-line and O-line, and you're going to have athletic advantages and make use of them in order to beat people. oddly, or maybe not oddly, but Sam Brown, who's now out for the season again this year, as a freshman, started just running over people. And I don't know if you remember that Ohio State game. I think it was Ohio State game. There's another game where he fired Gleason because Gleason wasn't just feeding the running back enough. And when he elevated one of the assistants who's now not longer with the program, and they started just feeding Sam Brown, and he was even getting a little traction on Ohio State. He was getting traction on didn't win the game, but it looked like, okay, the only way we're going to win with this particular team, with this player, is just feed this running back. Then he went all in on Kirk Ciarrocca, who knows how to throw the ball. We threw the ball. We got at UCLA off balance. But it seems like he kind of reneged on his new, like, I found the light. It's new era of college football. I'm going to have to be more open on the offense. It's going to have to be more athletic, and reverted back to his don't turn the ball over, play defense, and be in a shell and run the ball. I'm all for running the ball. We passed the ball a decent amount this game, but he's not letting guys field punts at all. So if you could field the punt on the 20, you won't. It'll roll into the end zone or roll to the 2. He won't let guys return kicks. And they've asked him about this. This isn't speculation. And he said, well, we're more of a kick block team than a kick return team. So he's playing in a shell. And you can't win in the Big Ten unless you have talent that's on par playing safe like that. You've got to take more chances. You got to get outside the box. So here's my thing. Greg Schiano's not getting fired this year. There's no way, based on bureaucratic considerations at Rutgers. There's no AD right now. A lot of things have piled on, but fans are legitimately skeptical now. And Schiano in his presser was very defiant. He said, take your shot. Take your shot now. Cast your ballot. But this program's not, this program's going to make it or whatever. Like, he's under attack. And rightfully so. But fans are rightfully, I think, upset. This was the end of a development cycle and a schedule that you couldn't have asked for a better one in terms of who you're playing. And we'll get to some of the teams, because I think some teams are underestimated, but teams you're playing and bye weeks, travel schedule, all those things, couldn't have asked for a better schedule. To be in a situation where Rutgers might be lucky to get to a bowl game is a real failure of this season. And next season's not looking good. So how long do you give? And I think what's happening in Indiana gets people even more aggravated. So that's where we are. People are really aggravated in New Jersey. And there is a lot of talk about where do we go from here once we move on from Schiano. It's not going to happen. But the fan sentiment is certainly there. Not totally, but it's pretty strong. I haven't seen it like that in a very long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Young Bucket here in the comments, and I see everybody talking about IU. We'll get to IU soon. Don't worry. And even some Maryland talking there. LFG talking about going into a shell. I like that joke. We'll get to that. But Young Bucket says Rutgers was the pound for pound most physical team in the conference. Toure was the beating heart of that identity. Losing him in the preseason doomed Rutgers from the start. Larry, I think that's kind of been my perception is how much these injuries have hurt the program overall. And I wonder how much that has affected Greg Schiano. But the other piece of this, and this will be my last question because we do need to move on to the next game. The other piece of this is Athan Kaliakmanis and everybody questioning, should you have brought him in? Should you have brought Gavin Wimsatt back? Athan Kaliakmanis, he's not, known as a super accurate guy. Was this just Kirk Ciarrocca trying to bring in somebody that he knows, but at the end of the day was a mistake? Like, are the Rutgers fans blaming Athan Kaliakmanis as much as it seems like people on the outside are? Or do you feel like this really is more of a coaching injury type of thing that seems to be getting more of the blame, in your opinion?
I think what that comment said was really made a lot of sense. And I think both as commentators and as insiders in the program, people do not want to use injuries as an excuse. And I'm by no means using that as an excuse, because I think there are fissures within the program when you see that the too deep isn't where you want it to be at all. And you see blatant coaching mismanagement that I think is obvious on the field, regardless of who's on it. But the injuries are significant. They're not just starting players. The reason we thought Rutgers had high expectations, literally, this guy's coming back, this guy's coming back, who they're gone or injured, that has to figure in, right? I mean, and Toure is just one of them. Now you're missing you're going into the game against UCLA missing both your DNs. I think injuries are a big thing. I also think this league, people have a tendency, we're human. Team loses by a couple touchdowns one game. They don't look as good as you think they are. They're not the upper echelon of the conference. They must stink. They're like, might as well be going up against an out of conference team. These teams are, UCLA had speed on offense that Rutgers had to deal with and had trouble with it with that injured offense. I know you asked me about Kaliakmanis. There's been 2 games where Kaliakmanis, like the last 2 weeks, Wisconsin and Nebraska, where Kaliakmanis, people called him into question because the offense couldn't get it going. But this is why it's frustrating with Rutgers in general. This last game, Kaliakmanis was very good. Very good. And it was the defense that could not stop anything. So I think Athan Kaliakmanis was the proper upgrade. Was it the pinnacle of upgrades? No, but that was the best Rutgers was going to do. And I think he's done his job, except for those 2 weeks. We have 3 losses, and 2 of them were kind of on him. One of them, he did everything he could to win. So, and then the wins, he did enough. So I don't think, and I don't feel a lot of pushback against Kaliakmanis. Somewhat, after a loss, people say, oh, he's terrible. But I don't think it's on him. I don't think anybody really is focusing on him. I think it's injuries and coaching, and you have a war now, whether it's injuries plus lack of NIL or the coaching. I think it's a combination of both, and it's just unfortunate.
It really is, and I've been one of those people that's kind of been defending Kaliakmanis. I was a little critical of him at the beginning, talking about his accuracy and how it really wasn't an upgrade over Wimsatt. Now, I wasn't saying him as a player was not an upgrade. I was just talking about his accuracy. Of course, everybody took that as me saying Wimsatt was just as good, which I didn't think that was the case, but that's how it goes. But I definitely think that it's very difficult for Athan Kaliakmanis to go in and try to be converting 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8 all game. That's just not the player that he is, and that's not who you brought in the transfer portal. You brought in a guy who could get you 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3 at times, or he had the threat, and then you could run the ball. But right now, unfortunately, it's not been 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3. A lot of these 3rd down conversions, maybe not so much in the UCLA game, but before that, especially in the Wisconsin game and other ones like that, it was like 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8. And it's just like, I don't know. There's not many quarterbacks in the nation that are going to consistently pick up 3rd down conversions when it's that far.
Yeah.
No, just true. And I think, his accuracy was very bad percentage-wise in those 2 losses prior to UCLA. But in every other game, it's been a statistical upgrade over Gavin Wimsatt. Now, I know what you're saying, because he was mistake-prone and he didn't have the best accuracy, but it's not, even though that's an improvement, it's not saying Wimsatt's just as good or better. He's a better pure passer than Wimsatt. Doesn't mean he's in the upper echelon of the Big Ten. But for what Rutgers wants to do, he's done it except for 2 games, and we have other issues. So
yeah. I'll just say 2 quick things. One, I think it's really hard when you have high expectations, and then all of a sudden, like it's snowballing on them. And I think someone said in the comments, like, Schiano looked tense. Well, it's easier to build when you have no expectations. So I do think that's a significant factor. The other thing I'll just say, and we haven't talked about UCLA at all, I think a lot of credit has to be given to Deshaun Foster.
Yeah.
Going to Rutgers. I think he is in a position where everybody's out on the program and everybody's out on him as a coach. And they came in and they took care of business. And I know Rutgers is down, but I do want to make that point that I think it's a big deal for Foster. I'm excited to see, does that maybe build momentum for him as a coach? So I think that's
to
helpful.
piggyback really quick, just because I was at the game and I don't want to be so Rutgers centric, even though that's who I cover. The players on UCLA, they had something to prove. Okay. Garber, I mean, they were out there throwing up the first down. They were running their ass off. They were playing their butts off. And there was no lack of effort or enthusiasm from those kids who kicked off at 9 a.m. their body time. So it's not all just how bad Rutgers is. UCLA came out to play, and they were making plays all over the field, especially on offense. So something to be said for the coaching and for keeping the team playing despite the sentiment around the program.
Yeah, I think definitely need to give UCLA their props. They went in there and they played the game that they had to play to win. So as much as Rutgers is struggling in some areas and injuries, things like that, UCLA did what they had to do to win the game, and they definitely deserve credit for that. So, All right, Larry, let's move on to the Iowa at Michigan State game. This was a crazy one. I felt a bit vindicated in my stance that Brendan Sullivan needs to start over
Yeah.
Cade McNamara. I put out a poll out there. Like 80% of people agreed with me that Brendan Sullivan should come in. Guess what? Here we go. Cade McNamara back out there. He did lead a drive down the field, got his touchdown pass, but then he followed that up with like just throwing the ball into the ocean, and Michigan State caught it. Like I have no idea what he was thinking there. I will say, Jonathan Kim, Michigan State kicker, like that guy's going to be an NFL kicker if he keeps it up. That was amazing. 5 or 6 field goals
6.
in that game. That is just insane. Your thoughts, Larry?
No, I was on the road, but I was looking at McNamara, and that throw reminded me of when I was like you were a kid and you were just trying to see how far you could throw a football, but you had no idea where you were throwing it because it's just launching up. The guy comes back down with it. What was his QBR was 63.7, just 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 11 to 23. Just not a good showing at all. Uninspiring in a lot of ways. I mean, it's not like Iowa's offense has been lightening anything up, the last few years, but just not a great performance there. Michigan State, formidable, moderate middle of the road team playing at home. And the efficiency in the quarterbacking was, night and day. McNamara's throwing for, under 50%. And you got Childs throwing for 22 with 30. And when you're playing more efficient like that, you're playing at home, you have a good kicker, you're sound, and the quarterback on the other side is really not able to get much going at all and then throws an interception that's pivotal, you're not going to win the game. And so they both even up at 4-3. But you make a valid point, and I think you were right on that level. And I think you're going to have to do a little more offensively if you're Iowa to win on the road against teams that have, that can play against you. And, you're not going to be able to rely on just shutting guys down if you can't keep up. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the signs of an eventual quarterback change, right? We see Brendan Sullivan coming in the red zone. We see the fans clamoring for it at halftime. When I think I heard the stat Michigan State had more field goals at halftime than Iowa had completions, which was just like insane.
It's crazy. I believe it watching the game, but it's a problem. And I don't think with the way McNamara's playing at this point, unless you think it's going to be some crazy turnover fest or something, I don't see why you don't make the change and see if you can get the spark. Your season's trucking along. I mean, it's okay, but you got to do something because you're going to have more games like that, I think, if you stick with the guy you're with right now.
Yeah. And on the other side of the ball, Michigan State, Aiden Childs, he threw the 1 interception, but I mean, he was fantastic. Katron Lynch-Adams, he was very good, almost 100 yards on the day. I don't know if it was more, and Nick Marsh, I mean, that guy's fantastic. What he was able to do, how shifty he was. Now, he was aided by some poor tackling from Iowa all game, but still credit to Nick Marsh and what he was able to do, how, he was able to get around defenders and do that. So I was just really surprised at how poor defensively Iowa was the entire game. And this will be my last point. And Larry, you can comment if you have any thoughts, or Zach, you can. I just the tackling from Iowa just was so uncharacteristic. This was an Iowa team that, even with their backups coming in, I thought they would be good with their fundamentals and they would be able to do what they needed to do. Maybe they wouldn't make the spectacular plays, but they would be good fundamentally. And they just weren't. Like Sebastian Castro wasn't in there. There was another guy who was out at one point. I forget who it was, but they had some backup DBs in there, and it did not look the same at all with those guys in.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's reps. I don't know if it's when you kind of get behind the 8 ball because the offense isn't holding up its end of the bargain and you lose a little bit of luster there. You ever see defenses really executing at a high level? There's usually some emotional edge to it too. I don't want to go too much into that, but hey, you're missing some starters. Your offense isn't getting the job done. You don't have faith in them. You're on the road. You're not getting that edge, and you're missing tackles. Guys are making plays on the other side. It happens, and they got to clean it up because we know what kind of defense they can be, and usually we're used to them being, especially from a fundamental standpoint. So
yeah, I think, and again, I didn't get a chance to really see a lot of these games, but the thing that really stands out to me looking at the box score, Michigan State averaging 5.3 yards per carry, and they ran 70 total plays overall to Iowa's 46, and like Caleb Johnson. I know Cade McNamara didn't do much moving the ball, but Caleb Johnson had 14 carries for 98 yards, but 75 came on one run.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think two things that really jump out to me, and I think this goes to what you both are saying. It just seems like Michigan State controlled the lines of scrimmage, and like Iowa did not tackle well, which is both of those things are alarming to me. If you're
Well,
Iowa.
we've talked about it, Zach. Michigan State can do that. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like their trenches have been underrated all year. Like, they did not
Mhm.
give up a sack against, I think, Ohio State and Oregon. I mean, jeez, that's pretty impressive if you're not going to give up a sack to either of those two teams. It was pretty impressive. Now, I think they did give up at least one sack in this game to Iowa, but Iowa has a very impressive defensive front as well, so no shame in that. But
Yeah.
I think Michigan State has some underrated trenches. Don't be surprised if they win some
Yeah.
more games at the line of scrimmage this season.
I wonder too. Jonathan Smith is a good coach, and they had a bye week, so I wonder if that, like, their home bye week trenches are underrated. I think that's a recipe for.
They did have a
upset.
very good game plan with how close to the line of scrimmage the linebackers were playing, and honestly, that was how Caleb Johnson broke off the 175-yard run. They were talking about it on the broadcast the entire time, and they were exactly right. The linebackers from Michigan State, Jordan Turner, Cal Halliday, all those guys, they were just as close to the line of scrimmage almost as you can get. So Fisherman's calling a shot here, which I don't really disagree with him. He says Michigan State can beat Michigan. I don't think you're wrong because they stopped that Iowa rushing
don't
attack,
think
and I
you're
think that
wrong.
Iowa rushing attack is better than the Michigan rushing attack.
I mean, at this point, as you know, John Jacobs will appreciate this. Kent State could beat Michigan at this point. So, like, that's probably not true, but
It might be going a little overboard, but I'm for it.
that'd be their first win.
you
No,
go.
we're not gonna do that.
All right, let's go to the next game here. We have USC Maryland. USC falls in this one. Billy Edwards scores the touchdown late. Does his dance. Was that the Rizzler dance? I think
I was wondering what the hell that dance was, man. He was feeling himself, and I don't blame him, but I don't know what it was. I didn't expect it. I didn't see it coming. I don't think I want to see it again, but good for him.
He was feeling himself, man. I was like thinking to myself, like, all right, I'm glad you scored the touchdown, but don't ever do that dance again, man.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Please, never again.
It's like Mike Gesicki in the NFL. He did the terrible gritty, and now he has to do the terrible gritty every time he scores. It's like a trademark. I hope that doesn't become Edwards' trademark for Terps fans and all the Big Ten in general.
Larry, let's comments on Maryland really fast, and then I have something I want to ask you about USC. Maryland, they won this game. I mean, credit to them. They came back late. They did what they were supposed to do. Billy Edwards Jr., I think he's a very underrated quarterback. I think he's better than a lot of people give him credit for in this one. Not just in this one, in a lot of games this season. But your thoughts on Maryland, and then I'll ask you about USC.
I think Maryland's got a lot of playmakers that people don't necessarily, sometimes they underestimate. I know Tagovailoa is not there anymore, but they can win games. They're wildly inconsistent. They're very volatile. This game was volatile. At the end of that first half was like one of the longest ends. I thought our game had a long first half ending, but this thing dragged out like a basketball game. And it was just crazy how it went back and forth. Maryland almost shoots themselves in the foot. USC basically has the game in hand. You miss a field goal and then, Maryland goes down, wins the game. It was at home for Maryland. I just think there's playmakers. You got those wideouts. You have a quarterback who can make plays, gutsy showing from him. And if you get lackadaisical, or if you don't finish everything properly and you give Maryland a chance to make plays, they can make them. I don't know what else to say. Honestly, it looked like USC was going to win it, not just at the end there before the botched kick or whatever. I mean, it looked like they were going to win it most of the game. Even the end of the second half, Maryland was shooting themselves in the foot. But hey, you got to hand it to the Terps. You got to, USC been another one of those kind of volatile teams this year. So good win by Maryland. I mean, exciting game, fun game to watch. I mean, if you're a Terps fan, you were there. I mean, you had a lot of fun. Good for them. Good for Edwards, and he just needs to go to dance class. That's all.
We'll get him in dance class. We'll put together an NIL fund for that. Look, you're exactly right, Larry. I'm looking at the win probability on ESPN right now. USC was literally ahead the entire game, and at one point they were literally at 97% with 2 minutes left in the game. They were at 97% win probability with 2 minutes left in the game, and then once Maryland gets to, what was it, USC's 20-yard line with 1 minute left. It finally shifted, and Maryland had an over 50% chance of winning the game. Like, just absolutely crazy that it gets there. And I will say, like, how strange is it that we're talking about Maryland having better playmakers? You would think USC is the team with Zachariah Branch, all the, like, Jacoby Lane. Like, you're talking about all these guys. These guys should be the better playmakers. But no, it's Maryland with Ty Felton, Caden Prather. Octavian Smith showed up in this one. I mean, that's what you and I were talking about before the game, Zach, was like, Maryland needs a third wide receiver to step up. They got it in this one, and look what happens.
Yep. And I would say, I wouldn't even, Miller Moss is throwing the ball all over the field. I mean, 34 of 50, 3 touchdowns to 1 INT. It's not like didn't have the.
And they're calling for the backup to play right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, they're playing ball. I mean, they're on the road. They're coming from west to east. It's just you got to give Maryland, and they would clean Rutgers clock a lot at the end of the season last 3 years. And it's like Tagovailoa, yes. Huge loss when you lose your starting quarterback. But these guys have been recruiting playmaking guys on the perimeter for a long time, and they can be volatile. Some games you're like, forget Maryland. That's a W for what. In other games you're like, wow, they're really good. They could do a lot of things. So I don't know. I mean, USC has a chance to ice the game. They don't. Maryland makes you pay. And just by the way the game was going, I was surprised that USC didn't ice it when you thought they would. But I wasn't surprised that once they didn't, Maryland made them pay, because the whole game had been Maryland was showing, hey, we can make plays. We can score points. If you give us the opportunity, we're going to do it. And that's exactly what happened.
You're exactly right. Last thing we'll say on this, Larry and Zach, if you have any thoughts, feel free to chime in as well. I mean, at the end of it, Lincoln Riley said, I own it. It's my responsibility. I've got to get this team to play better at the end of the game, and I've obviously not done a good enough job of that. At one point, he was quoted just saying, I don't know. When they were talking about the in-game situations, what he's supposed to do, he's point blank saying, I don't know. He is at a loss right now. He doesn't have answers. I mean, is this USC team, Larry, we'll go to you first. Is this USC team just in free fall at this point? I mean, a coach that doesn't know what to do, a team that's not playing super inspired football. I don't think that's a secret. I think anybody seeing them play right now, once they get down, they are just deflated and kind of out of it at this point. I mean, what's your thoughts, Larry?
I just, before the season started, a lot of fanfare for USC. I was one of them. A lot of expectations for USC. I think there were some people that said this change in conference, this grind of a travel schedule, this grind of a style of play may not suit USC the way some think it's going to. And that's not to say that they'll never get up to speed or to, toot our own horns who've been here longer. But the fact is, it seems like maybe from just a every down standpoint and a resiliency standpoint in this league, maybe this program was not ready to go to the likes of College Park, Maryland, and get a real tough fight that they had to be in it every play to see through to the end. And this adversity week in and week out that they've been facing is catching up to them a little bit. Now, they have the talent to still be okay. But when you are lacking the type of mentality going into a conference schedule that maybe they have been, that's maybe showing when the coach is saying, I don't have answers, it's questionable whether they will be able to see it through in some of the ways they want to, because it's not laid out the way I think a lot of people thought. And I don't know if some of the guys in that locker room thought, and every week is an absolute war and battle. And I guess I get to see on Friday how they respond, but I'm not necessarily confident. But even that's going to be a battle in some ways. So I don't know. I think they've got to get used to what they're up against. But again, things happen. Guys on the other side are paid too. Guys on the other side are on scholarship too. And Maryland has some playmakers. So I'm not necessarily ready either to act like this was some just terrible showing that they can't rebound from it all. Sometimes bad plays happen. I know that it's uncharacteristic. It's not where they want to go with the level they've been playing at, but they can get it together. I just think there's something to be said for the war week in and week out in this conference. Maybe they weren't ready for it and they're getting a little down about it.
I feel like, I'll just chime in real quick. I feel like and I appreciate what you're saying, Larry, because I think USC I think a lot of USC fans thought they'd come and win the conference. And I I'll take it a bit further. I think it's a bit of a disaster that USC doesn't have a better offensive line to deal with a team like Maryland.
Fair
20
enough.
Yeah, 24 carries, 81 yards against a team that, quite honestly, they have not been able to handle power teams. I mean, they could not handle Michigan State. They couldn't handle Northwestern last week. And and I think that's like I joked with JR off screen. USC is making me say nice things about Mike Locksley, and the people that listen to this fine show know how much I love doing that. But the reality is Mike Locksley outcoached Lincoln Riley. And so you're
In
getting
October, Zach.
in
October.
in October. And so he's getting outcoached. He's getting out physicaled by a team that generally does not out physical teams. And they're in a shootout that they lose. Like it's a disaster. And I want to be careful because I think any Clay Helton, Lincoln Riley comparisons, I think are a bit unfounded just because of the change in conference. And I think you do have to account for that. But I think there's a lot more built-in excuse if the losses are to, if it's not just Penn State, but Ohio State and Oregon. Like, I think that makes sense. But this is to Minnesota, Maryland, and Michigan. And it's Michigan on a down year. Like, they're bad.
Yeah, they are.
And like, I get that the 3 losses have been on the road, but Northwestern went on the road and beat Maryland. And I know USC should be better than that, and they're not. And I think that's a question not just for Lincoln Riley from an X's and O's standpoint. That's an issue with how he's chosen to construct his team. And that's a real issue.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think that there is definitely some getting used to with the Big Ten, and especially with the traveling and stuff like that. I don't know if Lincoln Riley is going to do it. Lincoln Riley has built some really good offenses, and he's had some really good quarterbacks, obviously, multiple Heisman winners in his day, but I think in the Big Ten, especially with this travel, I don't think a Heisman winner gets you to 10, 11 games all on his own right now. And I'm not saying that's what happened every single year for Lincoln Riley, but I think that's kind of what you were hoping for this year was Miller Moss would be a Heisman candidate and he'd kind of get you to 10, 11 wins. And I mean, I don't think this is Miller Moss's fault. I've been critical of him, but I think at the end of the day, this is a lot of offensive line, defensive line issues. And Philip brought it up in the chat. I don't see the comment here anymore, or not Philip. Fisherman brought it up in the chat. Just lack of depth, red shirts, guys entering the portal, stuff like that. It's unfortunate, but just what it is. So, last one, and then we'll get to a break, guys. Oregon shuts out Purdue. They had no problem with the travel, and they went into Ross-Ade, and that was a crowd that, honestly, Ryan Walters does not deserve. Ryan Walters does not deserve that crowd, and he sucks. Plain and simple. Ryan Walters, you're awful. You almost beat Illinois. Congratulations. You got shut out 35-0 against Oregon. Ryan Brown had a great game the week before, and you just completely squandered him in this one. I have no words. Purdue, you are a MAC level team. Oregon, you are very good, and you did not get bit by the travel bug. Larry, your thoughts?
I was just going to say, as we're talking about USC and all the travel and the conference and these Pac-12 teams, like, the Ducks don't care. Like, look what the Ducks have done. They're just cruising. I mean, Purdue is Purdue, but Purdue, I was so surprised when they hung, because I'm confused about this conference right now, like with the middle of it, not even the middle, like everything from like number 3, like to number, I don't know, 13, 14. It's confusing. So I'm trying to ascertain, like, okay, well, Purdue just hung a whole bunch of points on Illinois, and Illinois is pretty good. So maybe Wisconsin is really, and I do think maybe Wisconsin is a little better than people think, but Oregon has no problem with anything. Purdue just no points. Like you said, Brown had a good showing the week before. Brown 9 of 19 now. Just just Purdue really has no answers for anything, and Oregon is cruising. I mean, they're meeting the challenge of this conference and keeping their reputation intact exceedingly well. I'll just leave it at that, and it's impressive.
Yeah. I will say Oregon did have a real problem, and that is that one of their own players knocked over the duck and like broke its neck.
Oh yeah.
So like that was almost a travesty. And that, I think that's a travel casualty. I mean, that just does not happen at Autzen.
True.
That's
a casualty.
Yeah. That's what did it. That was the travel issues that they had, was they got players running into the duck. And did you see Kent's tweet where 13 kept running, and then right as soon as he got up, another 13? And they looked exactly the same because, of course, they're everybody who wears 13 is that same like body type and everything.
Yeah,
so
like,
that was hilarious.
I was so confused when Ken posted that.
Yeah, I really don't have any other thoughts here other than Oregon very impressive, Purdue very bad, and I mean, that's what we thought. So, congrats. We're going to get a commercial break, everybody, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about Wisconsin, Northwestern, then Indiana, Nebraska, and Michigan, Illinois. Stay with us. Have you ever wanted to watch all 22 film, that film the coaches watch? Well, now you can. Introducing the Coaches Film Room. Over at Minutes to Sports, former college coach Zach Smith breaks down film of the most relevant teams in college football with a bit of a Big Ten lead. It's not free, so you'll need to sign up for the Colonel tier, which is $25 a month, but I can attest to you that it is far more worth it than that. With about 4 to 8 games per week, this is worth so much more money, not to mention Zach's analysis, making you a smarter football fan. Go check it out. The links are in the description, minutestosports.com. You won't be sorry. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle, we appreciate everybody being here. Please do like the video, subscribe as well. If you listen on podcast, give us a 5-star rating. We definitely appreciate that. If you don't like the podcast, don't give us a rating. Please do not give us a 1-star rating. Just go along your way and never visit the podcast ever again. I mean, you can visit again if you like it, maybe stick around, but if you're not going to give a 5-star rating, just please leave. All right. Wisconsin, Northwestern. Larry, this Wisconsin defense has been legit the past few weeks. They've had 14% teams converting on 14% of third downs. The scoring defense has been less than a touchdown. I think it was like 5.3 or something like that when I did the stats earlier. I mean, teams are barely getting over 200 yards against them. I mean, this is just incredible what this Wisconsin defense is doing right now. Now, I do think Braden Locke and Tyree Walker, some of these guys on offense and the offensive line, definitely they deserve credit. But really, it's been this defense that has been leading this Wisconsin team week after week these past 3 weeks, and really what's made me rethink some of my thoughts about them, because I thought they were going to be very good, and then they didn't do so hot, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is the worst team, and then now they're playing really well, and I'm like, oh, okay, 6th best team in the Big Ten, top 5, possibly not top 5, but top 10 at the very least, top 8 up there as well. So, I mean, this has been a good Wisconsin team. Larry, what were your thoughts about them against Northwestern here?
They have an elite secondary, and their closing speed and their athleticism there is exceptional, to say the least. What's been interesting to me is it looked like there might have been a weakness in that run defense and that the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. But really, they've gotten much more stout, and they've been pretty tough to deal with. And I think, look, they had a tough schedule to contend with heading into conference play. I think it's going to lead some people to think one way or the other. I think Fickell comes in and he's trying to change the traditional Wisconsin way of things. And I think there were a lot of complaints. Adam Madison at a point, we're not lining up an I formation. We're not a power team. What are you doing to us? But you've started to see in the last couple weeks, behind and on the strength of that formidable defense, the fact that Wisconsin is still very powerful in the trenches. And when they need to, Fickell's threaded the needle between kind of innovating as best he can and also being able to rely on those traditional strengths for Wisconsin. They are a powerful team. I saw it firsthand. The offensive line too, and I know we're talking about the defense, but the offensive line. I don't want to sleep on it. I think Tyree had over 100 yards on however many rush. Over I think over 120 yards rushing the football. Um, I think you had a quarterback change that people thought might hurt them, but I think people are seeing that the kid is, despite being small. I've heard a lot of the fact that maybe he's the smarter quarterback who knows Fickle's offense a little bit better. Who, when Locke was competing in the offseason, there was some talk of the fact that maybe he's athletically limited, but he knows the offense well. He knows how to make the right throws. Not a stellar showing from him against Northwestern, but the previous week, a pretty good showing. And I think you're seeing Wisconsin return to form, even with a changed philosophy, and their strengths are remaining that way. And you can't discount the athletes on that defense. And when they need to show up, they've been showing up. And I've kind of changed my opinion on Wisconsin too. And let's face it, it's not just outsiders. I was talking to Rajiv from the Bucky Report before the Rutgers game, and the sentiments were the same from that fan base and inside the program too. Like, are we going down the right path? Is this transition serving us well? And they had some doubts, and now a lot of their doubts are ameliorated too, to an extent, just because of Wisconsin putting its what we've come to expect forward. And I'm feeling more bullish on them, quite frankly. They dominated Northwestern. They've been playing pretty darn well on both sides of the ball, efficient on offense, stifling on defense, and I expect that to continue. It'd be interesting to see the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Northwestern team that just put up 37 points on the road against Maryland last week, and to come out and only score 3 points this week, I don't buy into this narrative that some people are saying is like, oh, Wisconsin's just been playing bad offenses. Like, yes, Rutgers has been struggling lately, sure, but Northwestern, like I said, they just put up 37 points on Purdue, or at Maryland. Anybody could put up 37 points on Purdue. They suck. They just put up 37 points on Maryland, which Maryland is not the best defense in the world, but that is on the road at Maryland on a Friday night game with a short week. Like, that's impressive to me that they were able to do that. And then Wisconsin coming out here, they just looked like the more physically dominant team in every aspect of the game: secondary, defensive line, offensive line, running backs. I mean, there was not a time in this game when I felt like Northwestern was pushing Wisconsin around at all. And I think that really says something about Luke Fickell and what he's done with this team after starting the way they did, struggling against Western Michigan, not blowing out South Alabama nearly as much as people thought they would, and then getting blown out by Alabama. That was kind of when people were thinking, including myself, okay, this team might not be as good as we thought they were, but credit to them. They've come out. They've been much more physical. Mike Tressel is one of the better defensive coordinators in the conference right now. I don't think he gets the recognition for that a lot of the time, but I mean, this is really good stuff by Wisconsin right now, and I think they deserve a lot of props for it. It's not just on defense, but like you said, the offensive line as well. I do think that their strength is more pass blocking than run blocking, but the run blocking was fantastic in this one as well. So you can't really, you can't really nitpick it at all.
Well, I mean, with that run blocking, we're seeing Tyree Walker really start to flourish. And I think you said this on our last show. He looks better than Chez Mellusi. And now, granted, they're not playing Alabama like they did a few weeks ago. Although Alabama looks like they've regressed. We'll talk about that later. But it is interesting. Ever since the Tyler Van Dyke injury, it feels like they have been building upon something. Even with the loss to USC, that you saw things in the first half of that game where Wisconsin felt like they were building upon things, and now it seems like they've really come to form. I think that Penn State game next week is very interesting for Wisconsin. Because
it certainly is. I was just going to reference that. I feel like this is one of Penn State's biggest tests at this point. Obviously, Illinois was a big test for them, but that was at home in kind of a whiteout environment. This is at night, but I don't hear James Franklin calling for the whiteout atmosphere. This isn't a whiteout, right? I forget when their whiteout is scheduled.
Well, no, they're going to Camp Randall.
Oh, yeah. I apologize. Yes, Penn State is going to Camp Randall in this one, and so this is going to be a very tough road environment because these Wisconsin fans are believing so much more than probably they were at the beginning, as you said as well, Larry. So, I mean, this is going to be a very tough environment for Penn State to try to go in there. This is going to be one of their bigger tests, arguably a bigger test than it was Illinois because it's on the road and not at home. I'm very excited about this matchup, and at the end of the day, I think we're going to learn a whole lot more about this Wisconsin team after this.
Mhm.
I'm excited to learn it. I mean, I'm excited for some things to be sorted out because, and that's normal, right? We're midway through the season, and some teams you thought you had a beat on, you really don't. Some teams you might still, but you got to see how the season shapes up over the next few weeks. You start sorting out, who's really contenders and who's pretenders, and that's one of the games I'm going to keep an eye on.
For sure. John Jacobs, thank you for pointing this out. I didn't realize it until I went and looked at it. We are at 97 watching live right now. And he just up to 106. So if you're watching live, thank you. We appreciate it. We've never been this high before. This is the highest our numbers have ever been live on YouTube. So definitely appreciate that. Go ahead and give us a like and subscribe. We cover every single Big Ten team, always recap them, always preview them, and we'll get to some coaches underrated, overrated later, and then we'll also get to some SEC trash talk, which we like to do as well. So if you're a Big Ten fan and you like talking about Big Ten teams and you like the occasional trashing of the SEC, you'll love it here. Go ahead, Zach.
I was just gonna say it's all because of Larry. Larry comes on, we cross over.
It's
100.
the accent. It's the accent.
The accent, the pocket square. I'm here. I'm here for you guys. Big Ten.
And the microphone, the old school. I just got this like pod mic here, man. You got the old school thing. I love it.
Yeah, they just see something. There's some pizzazz with the three of us on here. I like it. I like it. Keep hitting that subscribe and like button, guys.
Yeah, well, Terry's holding us hostage here. He says, answer my question. I will subscribe. Terry, I apologize. I missed your question. You have to put it in there again. I'm going back.
Oh, he's asked if we're confident, or he says he's confident that Indiana will score 40 at OSU. Are you guys confident OSU will score 41 or more?
I think Indiana's going to score a lot of points on Ohio State. Oregon just scored a lot of points on them, and I think that defense is in question for Ohio State. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to say 40 because I think that Ohio State has a better running game that they can control the clock a little bit better, but I definitely think that they're probably going to be, if not the most points scored on Ohio State, second most this season in the regular season.
It'll be a game in the 30s for at least, for sure.
Yeah. Larry, you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with both of you guys. I mean, I don't think it's going to go all the way up to 40 for a couple of reasons, but I could see it being a high-scoring game. Indiana, we'll talk about them in a second, I guess. So,
yeah. Well, let's talk about them now. How about that? Hit subscribe, everybody. And yes, John Jacobs, Terry playing hardball. You got to do it. You got to do it. So. All right, so let's talk about Indiana now. Indiana comes out, absolutely blows out Nebraska 56-7. Curtis Rourke, he goes out at the beginning of the second half in this one. There were some thoughts that he maybe could have continued playing, but at that point they were up by so much it almost felt like they didn't really need him to keep playing and felt like they were very confident in Taven Jackson. And honestly, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be confident in Taven Jackson. Taven Jackson goes 7 for 8 in the second half, and he has 91 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 99.9 QBR. Zach, we talked about the -1 QBR Mike Wright had earlier this season. Well, Taven Jackson comes in with a 99.9. That's pretty impressive, especially for a backup.
That's good, right?
Yeah, very good.
Okay, just want to make sure. Just wanted to make sure.
So, I mean, this was obviously just a complete blowout, routing, whatever you want to call it, by IU over Nebraska in this one, Larry. My question for you, Larry, is this more IU being good or is this more Nebraska being bad?
I think it's a combination of both, and that's an excellent question to kind of talk about both teams here. Look, what Cignetti has done with Indiana is nothing short of quite impressive, and I think that's an understatement. He brings in a lot of transfers. He brings in guys that he knew, but he brings in guys from other programs. But you just look at the way that things are running there. The offense, the output is astounding. You look at the rushing attack. You got Ellison, 9 carries, 105 yards. Lawton, 8, 64 yards. I mean, all over the field, things look wide open when they're playing. They're dominating. You think, okay, first couple games, Let's see when they get into conference. Let's see when they have more formidable adversaries. Now, they're going to have more formidable adversaries still. So a lot to be sorted out. But it's still, this is Indiana we're talking about. This is a team who many seasons in and out, the Hoosiers do not look like the upper echelon, is an understatement in football anyway, of the conference. And they are coming out and they completely dominated Nebraska as if it was, an FCS team, just making it look easy. The backup comes in, he's efficient, just one incompletion. I think with Nebraska, what you're seeing is they are very much still in the earlier stages of a rebuild. There's still a lot of promise with Raiola. There's still a lot to be like there. But some of what the hype was earlier in the season, with a true freshman who has a ton of talent, but he's the one stirring the drink. He can't do it. He's still going to be prone to freshman mistakes. You started to see it even with Rutgers, and that was at home. Struggled to score, only 2 touchdowns the offense mustered in that game. He made some mistakes, made a ton of mistakes against Indiana. 3 interceptions, no touchdown throws, and they're throwing the ball 44 times. So when you're relying primarily on that true freshman quarterback, I don't care how much hype, I don't care how talented, I don't care how physically gifted he is. That's a problem with coaching and philosophy, though, to an extent. And I think Nebraska is showing that despite some of the promise they came in with, they are very much trying to just claw their way. And then, look, they're 5-2. So they've got one more game to get bowl eligible. I think that's the goal, is to see progress, to continue to build. And we know what that coach can do. We've seen him do it at Baylor. We've seen him do it at Temple. We know what he can do. So you want to keep building, but there's a serious problem when you bring in a true freshman. You don't have the support network from a philosophical standpoint or run support around him to really help him to succeed early on. Some of the bumps in the road are expected, but you can't just put everything on his shoulders and expect him to run with it and have a great season. Season's not bad, 5-2, but it's a combination of Indiana being very impressive, no sign of slowing down, really impressive job by Cignetti. And then on the other side of the ball, you got to have more of a plan than just relying on a true freshman to do everything for you. He threw the ball a bunch of times, made a bunch of mistakes. Indiana dominates, and that's the story of the game.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, for me, it didn't help Dylan Raiola that one of the times when they had their best drive of the game, I think it was their second drive, they get down into Indiana's side of the football. I think they're almost in the red zone. I don't think they're quite there yet. And it's 4th and 1, and they fumble, and they don't get the 4th down conversion there, which for me, that was like the turning point of the game. Like, that was at the end of the first quarter, still only 7-0. Indiana had been stopped at least once. They did have the long touchdown drive, but they got stopped and got a turnover on downs there, and then you get back to Nebraska. And so I felt like at some point there, like, Nebraska still had hope and still felt like, okay, we can do this. But the fact of the matter is, going against a team as good as IU, you're not going to win on the back of a freshman quarterback. I don't care how talented you are. And I think Dylan Raiola is very talented. I just think he's a freshman quarterback. I think he's going to be much better as the years go. But in this one, like, you can't have your running back fumbling the ball and not converting on 4th and 1. If you want to win these type of games, you have to do that. And I just felt like there on out in the second quarter, Indiana was just efficient, looked like nothing could stop them. And to me, it looked like Nebraska started to give up, which I think is an indictment on that team, which is unfortunate because I would like to believe that Matt Rule teams are better coached than that and have more motivation than that. But I think even Nebraska fans would agree. You watch that team into the second quarter, into the third quarter, like, they did not look nearly as motivated as they did at the beginning of the game.
They had some sloppy play this season too, like in other areas too, some block kicks, some things that they got to get fixed. So despite the fanfare and what many perceive as an ascension with Matt Rule, which is still very much in play, obviously a very talented young quarterback, there's some issues there that they hope will get cleaned up and don't become wider, narratives surrounding the program going forward. It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah. Last question here, Larry, and then Zach, this is a little bit predictive, so you can answer this as well. We'll obviously talk more about it when we get into the preview, Zach, but Taven Jackson, he's going to take over next week. Now, it is at home against Washington. They're not traveling to Washington, which is a benefit for them, but Taven Jackson taking over. Curtis Rourke has been so good this season. I think that the running game does not get enough credit for what it's been able to do, and I'm not trying to take away credit from Curtis Rourke. Curtis Rourke been fantastic. I'm just saying I think the running game helps that a lot as well. But Larry, do you have a lot of concerns with them not having Curtis Rourke for this next game? Washington, not an elite team, but they've done some good things this season. I still think this is a good football team in Washington. What's your thoughts, Larry?
Where are they playing that game?
At
You
Indiana.
probably just said it, but where?
Yeah, at Indiana.
At Indiana.
I have less worry because it's at Indiana. I think Washington is a very talented team and has a lot of ability, but they are not the toughest adversary this red-hot Indiana team is going to face down the stretch. I think you got to rely on other players. You got to rely on your running game. You got to get the ball in the hands of your playmakers quickly. I'm not terribly worried about Indiana this week. I think anytime you're having great success with a starting quarterback and you've got to put your backup in, you'd be silly not to have some concern. But based on the way this coaching staff has gone about it so far, based on the amount of transfers that are upperclassmen that this team is stacked with, I think they're going to be able to weather that storm and they're going to have a solid game plan to tackle it. And one of the things I worry about with Washington is the coaching and how good it is and whether or not they have their stuff together on a week in and week out basis. So this isn't the game that I worry about Indiana with, even with the backup quarterback. Now, I'd be a fool to be as confident as I would have been if they're going in with their starter. But I think they pull it out. And I think for Indiana fans, it'd be a darn shame if because of a quarterback switch that they stumble against a Washington team that I think they're primed to beat, especially at home. We'll see what happens. I don't think it'll be as easy as it had been, but I still expect them to be okay.
Yeah. Zach, really fast. I see people talking about, yes, Taven Jackson is Trace Jackson Davis's younger brother. He is his half brother. I
did not know that.
Yeah, same mom. I believe Dell Davis. I think I'm getting the correct dad. That's Trace Jackson Davis's dad. I think somebody else's Taven's dad. It really doesn't matter all that much.
That's awesome.
Half brothers, but still, I mean, Trace Jackson Davis, who is a legend.
Awesome player, dude. Awesome, and I love to hate, and we beat him a good amount of time, but awesome player, man. So that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but yeah, it's so even though he doesn't have the Davis, that's why half brother situation there. But Dale Davis. I apologize. Thank you, John. Go ahead, Zach.
I was just gonna say, I think the one thing that would concern me, like Nebraska doesn't have the playmakers that Washington does on offense. And so Nebraska didn't run the ball well at all. I mean, I think it was 29 carries for 70 yards. Jonah Coleman. There we go. Jonah Jackson was a guard for Ohio State. Good job, Zach. Jonah Coleman.
He's not running the ball in this game.
No, he's not. Jonah Coleman, on the other hand, I think he's going to be a different back than they faced. Giles Jackson and Denzel Boston is going to be the best pair of receivers that they faced. Will Rogers is going to be the best quarterback they faced. So I do have some concern. The other concern I have is Washington's coming off a bye week. So they've had time to rest up, maybe install a different game plan. So I'm probably less concerned about Taven Jackson, though, than I am about just what, Indiana has done a good job of being a disruptive defense. They did struggle a little bit with Maryland, just with the pass game at times. I thought defensively they were mostly pretty good. So when I say struggle, I mean struggle relative to how they've looked the rest of the season. So Indiana fans, don't jump on me for saying that. But this will be the hardest test for them from a defensive standpoint, just with all their playmakers.
Yeah, no, I agree. We'll see how it goes. I'm very confident in Taven Jackson, though. I know people can bring up the stats last year, like 2 touchdown passes, 5 interceptions. But, guys, Tom Allen was his coach. I mean, that's what happens when you're on offense and Tom Allen's your coach. Anyway, good defensive coordinator for Penn State. We said it multiple times. He's going to be a good defensive coordinator, but not a good head coach. Just is what it is. All right, let's talk about the final game here. We have Michigan and Illinois. Michigan fans, they needed this one. This was a very important game for them. This was kind of the game I was looking the most forward to because I felt like there was a lot more on the line. I understood for Indiana they had something to prove, but like for playoff implications, ranking implications, I felt like there was a lot more on the line for this game, and I felt like there was a lot on the line for Michigan fans and their perception of the program, not just now, but in the future. And I was right about that because Michigan lost this game. They looked anemic. They did not look prepared. They coming off a bye week, you would expect a whole lot more. And Jack Tuttle is not the answer. I mean, if you're asking me, you go back to Alex Orji at this point. It just Jack Tuttle is not a good quarterback. He's a 7th-year quarterback in college football for a reason. And I think that anybody that was hoping that he would be the answer, I think you got your answer in this one. He's not the answer. What were you gonna say, Zach?
I'm just gonna say two things. One, what I've been saying about Jack Tuttle, I said don't trust him. I said it.
Yep.
So that's
You
the
did.
only that's the only time I'm gonna gloat in this show. I'm sorry, JR.
That's
But
You deserve it.
Well, here's the second thing though. I just think all the Illinois fans need to thank me for picking against them or picking against Illinois because when I
Yeah.
pick against Illinois, they win. So
You're
I
the
just
good luck
think
charm.
I deserve some credit for being a hater.
Yep.
That's all I'm saying.
Philip, if you're still in the chat, yes, Philip, you're there. Send cookies to Zach. All right, he helped you out. So, Philip, get on that. Yeah, no, I don't want to make this too much about Michigan because I do think Illinois deserved the win in this one. I think that Luke Altmaier was fantastic, even though he only threw for 80 yards. This was a kid that was playing with all kinds of heart in this game. He was running the ball. He was doing anything that they asked him to do. Was it McCray? Was that the? They rotated their running back so much at Illinois. I keep forgetting who it was. But their running back in this one, Josh McCray. Yeah, he was fantastic running the ball in this one. Only had 50 yards, but seemed like every time you needed some yards in this one, he was able to get it for you. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like, yeah, we can talk about Michigan and, you know, how this is just not the team that they thought they were, and the coaching staff is definitely not what the fans hope for. But I think the real story in this one is that Illinois, I think, is a legit team, and I think that they showed that they're not just going to beat you, you know, playing their brand of football. Because in this one, Illinois should have been passing the ball more, but they beat Michigan, who has a good run defense, by running the football, and they beat Michigan by stopping the run. Jack Tuttle threw for over 200 yards in this game, and they only scored 7 points. So, Larry, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, the passing stats, you look at them, Michigan 208 through the air and Illinois 80. So, I mean, you know, just but able to still win on the back of the rushing attack, 187 yards on the ground. You know, and just this is the team that develops guys and kind of has been waiting to break out and be that consistent, solid team that they wanted to be. You're seeing it this year, 6-1. You know, against you got to beat the Michigans of the world when they're down. You got to do it the way they did it. Questionable quarterback play for Michigan. A lot of things in question at Michigan. Let's face it. I mean, look, they're in a rebuilding year. Any which way you slice it, they don't want to think that. They don't ever want to be there, but that's where they are, and they're not very good at all this year. I don't know what the early season hype and all that was about, but they're just not a very good team. But that's not to take anything away from Illinois. Illinois is as advertised. JR, I agree with your sentiments. This is a solid, good team, well coached, well balanced, and they did what they had to do, despite, you know, being outgained in some areas by Michigan to bring the game home and to win it in solid old school football score fashion, you know, 21-7, old school touchdown scores there.
With the old school helmets and the
dude, I saw it. I was like, those are like the leather heads. Like, that's awesome. It's awesome to see. It looked authentic. It looked like real leather helmets when I was watching.
Yeah,
Those are cool
those uniforms were ugly as could be, but they did, you know, remind you of 1924
Yes.
very well, which I guess a very ugly uniform should do that. So,
Yes.
but I did really like what CBS did with the intro, like the whole changing the filter and like the going back in time and stuff like that. I thought that was
Cool.
excellent. CBS did a very good job covering this game and putting that sentiment there into effect. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, I don't really know if there's much more to say at this point other than Michigan's in trouble. And unless Dave Poitnoy comes in and gets them Bryce Underwood, which I personally don't believe that's going to happen. I know there's a lot of people out there in the Michigan world that think so. And, you know, by all means, go for it. But I mean, I've not seen Sam Webb actually say Bryce Underwood's name once. It's just everybody is assuming he's talking about Bryce Underwood. My question is, Zach, did you see the tweet from Dave Portnoy after the game?
I did not. What did he say?
He said, "Don't worry, I'm working on it," which many are perceiving as he's getting the money together to buy Bryce Underwood. But Zach, is it possible he's working on getting the coaching staff fired by buying them out? Because the money that it would take for Underwood is about the same of the money that it would take to buy out Sharon Moore, which is $5 million. That's, I mean, the Michigan is not happy with this coaching staff at all, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't be happy with them either.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was talking with our friends Andy and Jared from Out of the Blue, and I think they were very clear that the coaching staff has underperformed, and I think that's putting it lightly. It's not good, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that Portnoy might do. I also think there's a discussion to be had about a single donor giving $5 million to buy a player. Things that NIL was
talking,
not.
They're talking.
For.
There's more than just him. Like there's other people around it as well, I guess. But I don't know. This is such a crazy story. I don't believe it till I see it. Go ahead, Zach. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say. I think there's a later podcast to be had on the abuse and misuse of NIL, but that's neither here nor there. But I do think there's some real possibility that there might be some heads rolling as the season goes on. And I think someone in the comments, I forget who it was, they made a really good point. At what point do players start making business decisions and saying, this season is tanking my draft stock and I'm out?
Yeah. I think you're already seeing it from Will Johnson. And I can't say I blame him. He's been out and injured in multiple games so far this season. I mean, if I was him, I wouldn't be risking it. And it pains me to say that because I don't like this world of college football where players just sit out and stuff. But I don't think Mason Graham is going to do that. He seems way too invested to do so. And I'm not saying Will Johnson isn't invested. I'm just saying Will Johnson has had these injuries popping up during the season and stuff like that. For him, it almost feels like it's better just to, take your draft stock where it is because let's face it, this pass defense I don't think is getting any better. The defensive line is going to keep looking good in my eyes, but the secondary isn't going to look much better. Larry, you have any thoughts on business decisions for the Michigan top 10 players?
No, I agree with you. I don't love any of that goes on in any way, shape, or form. I didn't even like it when it was starting with the bowl games, and it's like everything is a slow descent. So my diatribe that I would give you on a philosophical, societal, social, whatever level is too much for this episode of the podcast. I wouldn't be surprised if people considered things like that because of, the team and program they signed up to play for, their draft stock, the type of caliber of player they are versus what's going on in the field. But from just a personal standpoint, a football fan, I hope not. I mean, there's still some things to play for here. You're not going to be the top of the food chain every year. I hope the kids play, but I understand it. I understand the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Fisherman says Michigan spent $16 million in NIL this year.
Even more reason, in my opinion, though, you play. But that's me. What do I know?
Yeah, I've seen that number thrown around. I don't know where people are getting it from. I'm not saying Fisherman's wrong.
There's so many numbers thrown around with NIL. I never know what's true and what's not. And sometimes I believe it. Other days I just shoo it off. I'm so exhausted with it because you don't even know.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But, I mean, if you got $16 million in NIL, you got to be leveraging that to some of these players. If Will Johnson's making, millions of dollars, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Colston Loveland, I honestly feel bad for Colston Loveland. My gosh, this dude is out here getting open. This dude is out here making spectacular catches. And you have Jack Tuttle just not even seeing the linebacker and throwing it right to the linebacker. And people are like, oh, Colston Loveland didn't go fight for it. It's like, what do you want him to do? The linebacker was right there. He's not going to just cut back and get the guy off the ball. I don't know.
Can I just, if they spent, and again, I'm not refuting it, but if they spent $16 million in NIL, where's a good quarterback?
True.
What are we doing?
Well, that's the difference.
True.
Ohio State spent 20 because they put 4 toward the good quarterback.
And people got mad
Michigan's
at us.
just missing that 4 to get to 20 by having a good quarterback. That's the thing, Zach.
Yeah, but I mean, people got mad at us. They're like, "Well, Howard's not good." I did. Oh, yeah. Hey, let's just
Hey,
Jack
there's our
Tuttle.
friends.
Jack Tuttle's the answer. Rajiv.
There's our
What's up,
He's
friends.
in the
man?
building.
Rajiv and Justin. How about them Badgers at the Bucky Report? Best Wisconsin podcast out there. Everybody, go check out the Bucky Report if you
great.
want any Wisconsin. Oh, saying something else again. We will shock the Big Ten next week. Put some love on these Badgers. I'm thinking someone in the panel picked Northwestern. Yeah, Zach, own up.
I was like, didn't you pick Northwestern too?
No, it was just you.
That's no. I see that smirk. We'll go back. We'll check the records.
If I did.
I'm pretty
Did I
sure
pick
we both picked Northwestern.
I'm gonna go back to my notes. What was my score prediction? I picked. No comment.
Wow.
Hey, I just gave you love. Don't worry. All right.
Hey.
I just gave you love.
I just want to say I was honest about it. Rajiv and Justin, I was honest. That's
Honesty's overrated, Zach.
whatever.
We do, Rajiv. Don't worry. We respect you. We respect you. All right. Actually, I'm going to be giving Wisconsin some more respect as we get into the next segment. So don't worry. We will make sure we respect you by talking about our most overrated and most underrated coaches in the Big Ten. We'll be right back after we get to this commercial break, and we'll talk some of those coaches. The Big Ten Huddle is brought to you by the College Huddle, the largest fan-led college sports podcast community on the internet. With contributors from 70 different schools, you will get in all kinds of analysis from all over the country. Go visit thecollegehuddle.com to find your team and read articles from all across so many fans and contributors. The College Huddle is fan-made, fan-driven, and fan-fueled. I gotta start deleting these episodes after the fact so people don't have my picks. It's the reason why I put the SP Plus picks in writing and not my own picks, because I don't want people going back to them. All right, guys. Most underrated, most overrated coaches in the Big Ten. We are going to go one each, and then we'll come back and we'll go one each, one more. This don't necessarily have to be underrated. These don't necessarily have to be overrated. It's just back and forth, whatever you guys think. So, Zach, I'll let you go first. Give me a underrated or overrated coach in the Big Ten.
Oh man. I mean, I'll go, I think, with the obvious one. As much success as he's had, I still feel like he's underrated. It's Brett Bielema.
I was going to say that. You took it from me.
That's why I went. I'm grateful I got to go first.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you mean? Like, so where do you think people have Brett Bielema, and where would you generally kind of have him in the Big Ten? Like, I would have Brett Bielema top 5 in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk earlier this season. I need to go back to my notes about Big Ten coaches because I have it here. But I mean, a lot of people were thinking he was on the hot seat to get fired earlier this year.
I remember that. Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to find my coach's note here, and I forget where I had him.
I don't mean to press you. I'm just asking, like, generally,
no,
like, where do
mean,
you think people have him at, and like generally, like, where would you kind of place him?
I felt like coming into the year, people had him in bottom half of the Big Ten, and I would have him top 3rd.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. All right, Larry, underrated, overrated coach.
At this juncture, I'm not saying that, overall everything, just this season, looking at how Nebraska got walloped and then how there's no plan to support that young man this season. Matt Rule, and I'm not saying it in terms of he's forever. In 2 years, you come ask me and I'm like, you said he was overrated. Not that I don't believe in him overall, but I think, you got to have a better plan to bring along your young quarterback. Obviously, a great recruiter, a lot of charisma, those things around the program. Obviously, program's still on the ascension, but you can't get completely mollywopped like that. And you can't leave your young quarterback out to dry like that because, quite frankly, if you do that, you're going to stunt his development. Or in this new age of college football, maybe he's looking. I'm not saying that that's always going to happen. They're 5 and they're doing good, okay? But I just think a ton of fanfare. You got to have a better plan than what we saw last week, and so. I'll say he's a little bit overrated, and I also was going to say underrated Bielema, so I had to do it on the spot. So don't sue me.
That's fair. I think it's a fair thought.
All right. So my underrated is actually Luke Fickle, and I'm not just sucking up to Rajiv. This is actually what I plan to say. Listen, I believed in Luke Fickle to start the year, and I went off of that because of the performance early on in the season, and the Alabama game was kind of the capping that I was like, look, they weren't even competitive with them and stuff like that, and this is not the team that we thought they were. So, but at the end of the day, like seeing this defense over the past few weeks, this is the Wisconsin team I thought we were gonna see. Like Zach, you and I picked them to go 9-3 in the conference. We were very much so. I think we picked them to beat Oregon. I don't know if I'd make that same pick today still, but like I'm not. I still don't think it's crazy. And I'm seriously considering picking them over Penn State this next week as well. So, I mean, I haven't made my picks obviously yet. We'll get to those on Tuesday. But, like, this is a Wisconsin team that has displayed, albeit not the best Big Ten competition the past few weeks, but this is a Wisconsin team that is showing they are a well-coached team and they can put it all together if things are, I don't want to say going well for them, but if the game plan is going well and Phil Longo is in his bag, that's another piece of this. Phil Longo, when he's in his bag, it's really, really hard to stop this offense. I know they put up only put up 23 on Northwestern, but this is an underrated Northwestern defense where if you score 20 plus on them, you're a pretty good offense in my mind at the very least. So Luke Fickle, underrated.
Yeah. And I'll just say this. I was also down on him. And I think it says something to be able to round into form after a really disappointing first 4 games. So, and with, all the injuries. So I think there's a lot of kudos there for Luke Fickle.
I agree. All right. Give me one more coach, underrated or overrated, Zach.
So this is going to be controversial.
I love it.
Ryan Day's underrated.
Okay.
Here's
Keep
why.
going.
Here's why. I think a lot of people, and I'll go with what Michigan fans have said. Ryan Day was born on third base. I think we're seeing from a lot of the top tier programs how hard it is to stay elite. And like you're seeing it at Bama, you're seeing it at Michigan, and I think you're seeing it. You saw it at Texas as they've fallen off, USC as they've fallen off. Ohio State, Ryan Day is taking on a harder conference. And I realized there is a comparison that I think is actually very fair for Ryan Day that, again, I don't think people will appreciate, but I found it really helpful as I thought about it. Ryan Day is to college football as LeBron James is to basketball. Really good at recruiting, really good at X's and O's, really good at everything. He just can't finish. But you know what? 99% of college would want that. They'd want the great recruiting. They'd want all the wins. They'd want all the bowl games. They'd want all that. And they would take that in a heartbeat. And I feel like lost in the top 5, in the top 5 losses, we've kind of forgotten like just how dominant Ryan Day has been in every other aspect. So
he is an unranked team merchant. What is he, 43-0 against unranked teams?
He's also a Penn State merchant. So
well, that too.
Yeah.
That and Notre Dame.
Yeah.
He forces Notre Dame to only play 10 players because they're so afraid to put their players.
He's won 2 conference championships. Like I think people forget that. And he's the other thing I would just point out too, he has had to deal with the most dominant stretch of Michigan since John Cooper, which I know that's often a comparison, but like Cooper didn't have to deal with 3 straight top 5 Michigan teams.
Interesting. Yeah, Larry, you give your thoughts. I'm an Ohio State fan, so I'm biased. You give your thoughts, and then we'll get to your coach.
He makes valid points, but you are born on third base when you're him. I mean, Ohio State has different standards. We're seeing that in the comments. That's true. There was a lot of fanfare and hype earlier on too that I even thought like, whoa, pump the brakes. Let's see how he does over the course of a couple of years. So is he underrated? it's like he became underrated as people started to say, oh, maybe he's a little too much hype. I don't know. I mean, you make valid points I can't argue with, and that's my main thing, is not arguing with valid points. If I don't have any logical retort, I don't have any logical retort. So I'll allow it.
Yeah.
I'll allow it.
If I just add one more thing, people are like, LeBron has championships. LeBron didn't have a championship till he brought a closer onto his team.
That's true.
Couldn't win a title without Ray Allen. Couldn't win a title without Kyrie.
It's true.
Couldn't
He
win
wouldn't have a title without Ray Allen hitting that corner 3-pointer. So.
Exactly. That's why, like, I think he's not Michael Jordan. But I think he's LeBron. And I think if he gets the right assistant.
This is a crazy statement. I wish you would have the same record if Ryan Walters was there.
This is why he's underrated. Because
okay, fair enough.
Garbage. No offense, John. I'm sorry, but
I love that John said that. That is hilarious.
And I don't think John actually means that, but
I think he does. He's commented it quite a bit. I love that he commented that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, Larry, overrated, underrated. Who's yours?
I'm going to just give you 3 quick thoughts in general. The first one is not that controversial. The second 2 get me kicked out of Rutgers Nation for the rest of my life. But number 1, Curt Cignetti. I'd love to say he's underrated, but the guy comes in like a barnstorm, gets hired, and just lights the world on fire. There's no time to have him as underrated. So I can't say he's underrated. The dude's just coming in, and right now he's looking pretty good. Overrated, Greg Schiano is at great threat of being overrated if this continues the way it is. He has a lot of fanfare. People on the strength of his name and his reputation and his coaching style give Rutgers a lot of props. Being somebody who covers Rutgers and being around Big Ten and other college football analysts, all preseason, including you guys, a lot of you guys went out on a limb to say, hey, Rutgers is looking good for a lot of reasons. And part of that was him. And to have this kind of showing and to talk about being a developmental program and to really be stunted in your growth because of these injuries, he's not there yet, but he's at risk of, the hype and the name and the old school style from years ago, maybe overrating what he's capable of right now. Not ready to call my shot, as Greg said, quite yet, but it's worth mentioning. And then another guy who I know Rutgers Nation is going to kill me for, and probably everybody in the Big Ten, and I don't even know why I'm saying it because I'm really not a fan. But I'm going to say James Franklin only because at the end of the day, he hasn't gotten over the hump the way you want him to, but he's an excellent recruiter. And yes, there's a lot to be desired on the football field, a lot to be desired X's and O's. But every year now, not only they're recruiting at a high level, but they're always at the top of the conference. They're consistently a good team. They're consistently showing up year in and year out. It's not easy to do in the Big Ten. You just said it, Zach. It's not easy to do. I know he hasn't have all the accolades of some of the other guys, but, he gets a lot of hate from other teams, or especially Rutgers fans and all that, and I understand why. But at the end of the day, the guy is a perennial, really good team, perennial top-ranked team, perennial, really good recruiter. He might be a little underrated sometimes, just saying it. Hopefully I still have a podcast tomorrow, guys, but that's my thoughts.
No, I think that's valid. I think that James Franklin does get a little bit too much crap at times. Definitely showing this season that he has a good team put together. And I ranked Indiana over Penn State in my power rankings, but that was less to do about Penn State not looking good and more. I'm just super impressed with Curt Cignetti in Indiana. So, all right, so I'll get to my overrated. I'm really surprised nobody said Lincoln Riley for overrated. I was saving on that one, but the one I really want to say for overrated, and this might lose me some followers on Twitter. This might lose me some subscribers. That's fine. Kirk Ferentz. Kirk Ferentz is the most overrated coach in the Big Ten by far. Kirk Ferentz benefited from the Big Ten West for years. Kirk Ferentz has 200 wins in the Big Ten because of longevity, not because I don't want to say because he didn't earn them. Obviously, he earned every single win. But you look at when the Big Ten West was established, Kirk Ferentz, like I did the math on it. I obviously don't have time to do the math right now. I'll try to put it out there later on. But Kirk Ferentz's winning percentage in the Big Ten was like 20 percentage points higher when the Big Ten West existed than when it didn't exist. And now you're starting to see it again. You're seeing Kirk Ferentz not willing to put a different quarterback in there when the other team has kicked more field goals than your quarterback has completed passes at halftime. Like, what in the world are we doing? What, you have Brendan Sullivan sitting right there. It's Tim Lister's guy. This is obviously the guy that he wants on his team, and you will not put him in there. You just are content with continuing to run the ball with Caleb Johnson, especially when you've seen your defense struggle to tackle the entire game. You just think the tackling is going to automatically get better in the second half. That's not how the game works. A coach has to be able to feel how the game is going and make changes on the fly. Instead, he just went right back out there in the second half and said, okay, we'll run a little bit more read option with Cade McNamara, which worked once, and then it just stopped working after that. Congratulations, you got a 75-yard touchdown run off that. But at the end of the day, Kirk Ferentz has been a Big Ten West merchant. He has benefited off of that ever since Brett Bielema left, and he's like ever since then, he's not been able to put together the campaign that he had once in the Big Ten West.
Mm-hmm.
So that really just, I think, made his career look that much better. It was making people think that Iowa could be 10-2 this season. They're not. They're going to be 7-5. They're going to be 8-4. 8-4 is their ceiling at this point. And for me, I can't say Kirk Ferentz is one of the best coaches in the Big Ten when his ceiling is 8-4. Yeah, that's just me.
Well said.
Yeah, there's a T-shirt idea here.
We have like 15 T-shirts ideas. We need to
I
get
know.
going on this
We
stuff.
got to, former Big Ten West merchant.
There we go.
I like it.
When you literally have fans putting on their body, punting is winning. Like, I know it's a joke, but there are actually Iowa fans that believe that.
Oh, they're serious.
Like, it's not going to happen in the new Big Ten. Yes, it worked in the Big Ten West for a little bit. Congrats. It's not going to work anymore.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think the 12 Saturdays guys, who we love and respect, but I think they got to feel that way. It's
Yeah,
like, it ain't going to work anymore.
And don't get me wrong. Like, I respect Kirk Ferentz's longevity, how long he's been able to stay in the game. He really hasn't had all that many scandals. I mean, he had the gambling stuff here recently, and he had the, what was the thing that happened this offseason that got him suspended for a game? Like, and like, I respect that he like took accountability for that, but I don't love the way he treated, and I realize this is kind of inside Ohio State stuff, so just give me a second, but I don't like the way he treated Doug Maurice. I don't like the way that he hired his son for years. Like, at the end of the day, like, I just look at Kirk Ferentz and I'm like, man, you've been a coach for a long time. Congrats, but I don't think it's been very good for a long time. You've had good years, but a lot of those years was when the Big Ten West existed. And then you made it to the Big Ten championship game and you got blown out.
Almost every time.
Yep. Yeah. So, John Jacobs, would you say this to Kirk Ferentz's face? Sure. What's he going to do to me?
Yeah.
Is he going to punch me? That's fine. I've been punched before. Sure.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt that bad.
I mean, to that point, that's Doug Maurice did it. And that's what you're referring to is
right.
like
Which if people don't know this story, Doug Maurice after the Ohio State game, which this is one of the reasons, like, so Doug Maurice is an Ohio State beat reporter, and Doug Maurice has always felt like the Big Ten should be stronger to help, not just help Ohio State, but just in general to like combat the SEC. And I do feel like the Big Ten is getting stronger now, so I appreciate that. But he was looking at Kirk Ferentz as a program that's putting players in the NFL and actually being able to develop players at a good rate. But he felt like they were squandering that talent because Kirk Ferentz had this blind spot of hiring his son. So, of course, after the Ohio State game, he goes to the Iowa press conference instead of the Ohio State one and just starts grilling Kirk Ferentz in the press conference, which at the end of the day, he probably did go a little too far at times. There might have been one or two questions in there that it was like, I probably wouldn't say that. But at the end of the day, he grilled him, and then Kirk Ferentz came out the next day, didn't even say it to his face, came out the next day or a day or two later at his press conference and was like, yeah, I'm having a good day. A lot better than being that media guy. Man, what's his problem? You know, if I had to be that media guy, my life would suck. Yada, yada, yada. It's like,
well, I hate when that. I really don't like that.
Yeah.
When any athlete,
you should say it to his face.
I don't.
Like,
yeah. It was a low blow.
JR you got punched in the face. Did your face hurt? Yeah, but it healed.
I'm sorry.
Fine. It's okay. I was on the bus. I was in 7th grade.
It happens.
It's where a lot of fights happen. The bus.
Yeah, the bus. Yeah. The bus stop. The bus.
It's a dangerous place.
My
kids never ride the bus.
This is why my kids walk to school.
LFG, he says that reporter is a star. All those questions were fair. So you did see it. Okay. So yeah. I think it's probably on YouTube. Do you know, Zach? Is it out there?
It probably is. Which, by the way, if anyone has a connection to Doug, we really want him on the show at some point. So like, That actually
Yeah, I
might,
tried to message him. I'd love to have Doug
Yeah.
on here. We love
Yeah.
Larry, but we'd kick Larry out in a second. I'm just kidding.
yeah. No, we'd make it a quad.
Yeah,
That'd be
quad. There you go.
perfect.
Yeah.
Balance it out.
And we'd all be super skinny because right now I already feel kind of skinny with 3, but with 4, like. Anyway, all right, one more commercial break, and then we're gonna come back and just trash the SEC for like 5-10 minutes, and then we'll be done.
Beautiful.
So if you like SEC
Beautiful.
trashing, come on back. If not, have a great day. We'll see you after this. Homefield is your go-to destination for premium collegiate apparel with a passion for comfort and a flair for vintage design. Homefield brings you gear that is comfortable and stylish. With over 150 colleges to choose from, Homefield digs deep into the archives, uncovering forgotten logos, iconic mascots, and legendary moments to create one-of-a-kind apparel. Use my code TBTH for 15% off for new customers, or use my link in the description. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle. Zach, I realized we forgot to mention the name of it. Oh, sorry, Grant Fisherman. Kings of the North podcast. That's Is it King of the North or Kings of the North?
Kings of the North.
Kings of the North. Okay. Yeah.
It is
Thank you for putting that in there, Fisherman.
It's a great show. Like, it is a phenomenal show.
Yeah. And his co-host Bill Landis, I like him too, formerly of The Athletic. He's Ohio State, but I mean they're both Ohio State, but you don't get like a hint of Ohio State in there, I don't think.
Yeah,
So,
they're not fans of Ohio State. They are legitimate. Like, I mean, they both grew up in Pennsylvania, so they're like it's their profession. So I appreciate their takes, because I feel like they are not as homerific as other beat writers for Ohio State. So
Homerific. Gotta be careful saying that one. All right. The SEC, is the SEC just a glorified Big 12? Zach, Larry, I ask you this question because to me, SEC bias is telling us that the parity in the SEC is just because it's so strong. It's just such this awesome conference that anybody can beat anybody and all this stuff. Well, guess what? The same thing happens in the Big 12. In the Big 12, the reason that happens is because there's no elite team in that conference. Is the same thing true with the SEC right now, where there's really no, I wouldn't say no elite team. Obviously, there are elite teams in the SEC. They have all kinds of recruiting and stuff like that. But there is no top dog team that's number 1 in the country in the SEC this season, like we are seeing in the Big Ten, where you have Oregon, you have Ohio State, you have Penn State, heck, you have Indiana, who is looking like a number 1 team in the nation right now. I would argue that Texas, although they just lost to Georgia, they're the only team that has looked like a number 1 seeded team, and they just lost this last weekend. So my question to you, Zach, we'll start with you. Is the SEC just a glorified Big 12?
all right. So we got to nuance this a little bit, because if
I hate nuance, just answer the question.
well, but
Just kidding. Go ahead.
Because I think if you're asking if the SEC equals the Big 12, I would say no.
No, just glorified Big 12. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, they're better than Big 12, but
Yeah, and I think it's just helpful to point that out, because if you're gonna sit here and say, "Oh yeah, they're the same," like, they're not. Like, they're just not. They're nowhere close. But I will say this: I saw that Georgia got 2 first place votes in the coaches poll and 2 first place votes in the AP poll,
which is nuts.
and I think they should have their ballots revoked immediately.
We should see who did it.
Yeah, because not only have they lost to, quite honestly, a mediocre Alabama team, but Georgia, Texas was not good. It was not good football. Like, Ohio State, Oregon was 2 excellent teams. Like, just if you go down and watch the film, they were great. Now, I will say this: Sagarin, which it's the one of the metrics I look at. You know, there's S&P Plus. Sagarin has, I believe, Texas and Georgia 2 and 3, and they have Ohio State 1 and 4. So I think from the metrics, they're fairly even. But I would still say, at least from the top end that I've seen thus far, if Oregon squared off with Georgia and Ohio State squared off with Texas today, I would pick Oregon and Ohio State. And I don't think it would be that hard to do that. Now, if you go down further, like, I think Indiana, Alabama or it'd be Indiana, Tennessee. That's an interesting matchup. I don't know who I'd pick in that. I'd probably,
Indiana.
honestly, I'd lean Indiana.
Yeah.
Penn State, Alabama, I think there's some question marks there. Fisherman just said it, and I think this is helpful. SEC middle, it's much stronger in the middle, I think, in the SEC than it is in the Big Ten. But I think anybody that's sitting here and saying, well, the SEC is just dominant, like, guys, I don't know why Vanderbilt's ranked in the top 25. They lost to Georgia freaking State. This is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. There's no reason. And not only that, the other best teams in the SEC, LSU and Notre Dame, or LSU and Texas A&M, have lost to USC, who is obviously not very good right now, and Notre Dame, who is good but lost to a MAC team. So, like, I think anybody who's sitting there is like, well, the SEC is just so strong. Okay, then why are you getting beat by mediocre teams from other conferences?
Yeah, and why do you only play 8 conference games? Like, to me, this is something that gets so lost. Is like Vanderbilt has played 4 non-conference games, and their 4 non-conference games have been Virginia Tech, Alcorn State, Georgia Tech, or Georgia State, and Ball State. They lost one of those games, and it wasn't Virginia Tech. Like, they lost to Missouri as well, which, yeah, sure, that one was a nail-biter, but Missouri also got blown out by Texas A&M, and Missouri hasn't beaten anybody good. I guess you could argue Vanderbilt's good, but this is where the SEC bias gets into effect, where it's like, oh, well, Missouri's supposed to be good, and Vanderbilt beat them. Well, who does Missouri actually beat? Well, they beat Vanderbilt. And it's like, okay, but you're just going around in circles here. Like, you're just constantly going back and forth. Meanwhile, you have Wisconsin, who's 5-2, and yes, they got blown out by Alabama, but they've also blown out the past 3 teams that they've played, and they've also looked really good on defense. And so you're just looking at results here, and you're just looking at results in a conference that's not given nearly as much respect as the SEC is given, which it's wild to me. And so many SEC teams get away with these 5-2, 6-1, 5-3 records, starting next week, these 5-3 records, because they play only 8 conference games. And so you have teams like Vanderbilt playing Ball State in the middle of October. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And to LFG's point, he's saying LSU's improving. I think we recognize that. Like, LSU, I think LSU is probably a top 10 team right now. So I'm not trying to bag on LSU. I think it's the way that they're covered. Right. So I think, to your point, JR, Wisconsin, like, I might pick Wisconsin to beat Alabama right now with how bad they're playing. And I certainly pick LSU to beat USC the way they're playing. But I think that's part of the point, is that teams evolve and change over the course of a season. And I think it's oddly charitable to the SEC, as it always has been, to kind of assume that the SEC teams are just so much better by the end of the year. And I'll just address one more comment, and then, Larry, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But, like, someone said, Georgia had the best defensive performance that they've seen all year against Texas. Texas doesn't have a running back. And Quinn Ewers he has not been the elite quarterback we thought he was going to be. So does that mean that, I'm not trying to invalidate it, but I think we have to recognize that Texas offensively is really good in most positions. They're not elite overall. And I think the other thing I would just point out, Georgia offensively was not good. Like, Carson Beck has not been very good. The receivers have not been very good.
Threw 3 interceptions against Texas.
Yeah. And so I think the issue, and maybe you're bringing this up, every SEC team, and I mean every single one of them, has a significant flaw this season. And I would argue that the top Big Ten teams have less significant flaws than the SEC teams.
One thing before Larry goes, and Larry, I do want to get your thoughts on this. I get what people are saying about LSU, like, improving and looking better, but we always say this with Big Ten teams. Like, this is the part about the Big Ten that I kind of hate that we do, because we go at teams like Indiana and we say, oh, who did they beat? We go at teams like Nebraska and say, oh, who did they beat? But LSU has beaten they've beaten Nicholls State, South Carolina, UCLA, South Alabama, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. And I say, well, who did they beat? And people say, oh, well, they beat Ole Miss. Okay, Ole Miss beat Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, and South Carolina. Like, is South Carolina really that big of a win to get both Ole Miss in the how high is Ole Miss ranked right now? To get Ole Miss, what is it, 13th or 18th, and to get LSU into the top 10? Like, is South Carolina really that big of a win? Because at the end of the day, that's the most impressive win on both these teams' resumes. And Ole Miss, at the end of the day, they are just riding off of recruiting rankings and the preseason hype of it all. I contend that if you didn't have these preseason rankings at the beginning of the season, you would have a whole lot more parity in the top 25. But because we have Ole Miss as a what they start out as, like, 6th ranked team in the nation at the beginning of the year, I'll look it up really fast, because they were the 5th or 6th ranked team in the nation. We look at them and we say, oh yeah, Ole Miss is a good team. When in reality, they haven't beat anybody. They haven't done anything. In the games when they were tested, they lost. LSU, they lost to USC, who right now looks like a bad team in the Big Ten, but people want to excuse that because it's like, oh, well, USC is a talented team. I don't care how talented they are. If you lose, you lose. It is what it is. So I don't know, Larry, what's your thoughts?
No, I agree. I think that, first of all, the 8 conference games I've always been harping on that, because you look at these team schedules every year and the pancakes are ridiculous. And you're right. It's like the middle of October and they're playing these teams. You're like, we were done with that like late August, early September, sweating our butts off. I remember, I mean, we're talking, I think, yes, right now the middle of the SEC may be stronger than the middle of the Big Ten because of all the variables in the Big Ten. It's hard to even get a beat on anybody, but the upper echelon of the Big Ten is certainly, I think, certainly stronger this year than the upper echelon of the SEC. And I think when you get down to the bottom, I don't think the SEC, like all of this talk as if the SEC doesn't have bottom teams too that can lose to anybody. I remember back when in the 2010s, when Brett Bielema was at Arkansas, and Rutgers wasn't even particularly good. They weren't bad, but they were a middling, like, AAC team, I think, at the time, and beat Arkansas 2 years in a row on the road and at home. And I remember, like, oh, that's the big bad SEC. Okay, it's Arkansas, but it's still supposed to be top to bottom, so intimidating. But now you're looking at the Big Ten. Almost any time, even a lower tier team plays at a conference at another Power 4, not SEC, but they're playing ACC, or even you're seeing like USC come into the Big Ten this year now and whatever. Big Ten teams win that game. Like, no matter top to bottom, they're going to beat most ACC teams. Not that the SEC isn't, but I don't think the bottom of the SEC is so darn good that you can line up a top tier SEC team by saying, look who they beat, their other SEC teams, and use that as a validation of how good they are. I don't know. I think it's always been overhyped. I think it's when you look at the top tier, sometimes you have perennial powers, same as the Big Ten, and that skews things because those perennial powers are going to win a lot of national titles. Some years they're overmatching other teams, some years they're not. But when you look top to absolute bottom, I don't think the SEC necessarily stands out to me as some higher level that can't be touched top to bottom. I just don't get it. They're immortal. They put their pants on one leg at a time. They have crappy teams that are struggling every year at the bottom of the conference. I don't see anything great. And when they go toe-to-toe against the top of the old Pac-12, now the Big Ten, the top of the Big Ten, they're just as susceptible and just as evenly matched. So they're overrated, always are, always will be, because somebody pointed out ESPN has a vested interest. All these networks do, whatever. Hypes and narratives are hard to kill, and it's just going to keep going. So I'll keep hating. They'll keep doing what they do. People who don't know college football, casuals, are always telling me, the SEC, bro. And I'll always go into these diatribes and not change anything. But you guys agree with me, so we're happy.
It's true.
Oh, we're all happy.
Yeah.
I will reference this one more time, and then Zach, I'll give you the last word on. Well, not one more time. I haven't referenced this yet. Fisherman does point out, to be fair, Ohio State is top 5, with Iowa being their best win. That is totally fair, Fisherman. I would say though, Iowa is on a similar level with Arkansas in my mind. Arkansas has lost to Texas A&M and LSU. Now, granted, they did beat Tennessee, but they also lost to a bad Oklahoma State team. Iowa has lost to Ohio State, Iowa State, who are both top 10 teams, and Michigan State, who is a lower tier team. Like, there's not all that much difference between Arkansas and Iowa in my mind. Meanwhile, Arkansas received 5 votes to be in the top 25 this week after losing to LSU. They lost to LSU, got blown out 34-10, and they're getting 5 votes
It's
to be
crazy,
in the top 25.
bro.
The same amount of votes they got last week. They just got blown out 34-10 against LSU, and they get the same amount of votes. Meanwhile, Nebraska had double-digit votes last week. They get blown out by Indiana, a much better team, who because they aren't ranked as high, and now Nebraska is getting 1 vote to be in the AP poll. Like,
Yeah.
I
I
you
think
can't make this stuff up at this point. Like, and I don't want to pick on Fisherman here. I agree with
Yeah.
Fisherman's take. I'm just saying, like, if you look on the other side of it, this gets a lot more clearer.
Yeah.
The way I look at it. So I don't, like I said, I don't want to make it look like I disagree with Fisherman. I'm just
no,
saying. Go ahead, Zach.
But I think the better comparison is actually Indiana, because I think, and I appreciate Fisherman's question. I think Ohio State does get a little bit of SEC like treatment as long as it's not Alabama or Georgia they're going up against.
Yeah.
But I think Indiana, like, I think they're 13th in the AP poll. They're a top 10 team.
Yeah.
But if you put Alabama or Georgia or Tennessee or Ole Miss and gave them the same schedule as Indiana, and you just took away the helmet and you put any one of those teams in, and you saw all the scores and the score differential, the argument would be they're doing what good teams do. They're blowing out their competition. They're a top 5 team. I
Yep.
guarantee it.
Yes.
They would be top 5.
yes.
Like, not top 15. They'd be top 5.
yes.
And Indiana is 2 spots ahead of Alabama right now. And that's it. And people will say, well, they haven't played anybody. Nobody would be asking Alabama that.
Well, and like Joe Clapp pointed it out during the game, he was like, if Ohio State or Michigan was doing this right now to Nebraska, we'd be talking about them as the best team in the nation. But because Indiana's doing it, we're like, oh wow, cute Indiana. They must be for real. And it's like, have you watched the season? They've been for real all year. John Jacobs makes a good point here. He says OSU is treated like an SEC team as it relates to being ranked. Yes, Zach, and I think he's also talking to me. I agree. Ohio State is given the benefit of the doubt a lot of the time. I do think that that's also because of recruiting rankings. I'm not necessarily arguing about Ohio State here. I could care less in this situation about Ohio State because Ohio State has their own SEC struggles. They're what, 2-7, 2-9.
It's
I don't
bad.
know. It's bad. But I'm arguing more for teams like Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, Indiana right now. The fact that these teams are not being given more respect because they're not traditionally looked at as super good recruiting teams. And with the transfer portal now, it's even more difficult to look at these teams and say, well, how talented are they really? You know what I'm saying?
And I think with that, the thing that people need to understand is we're not criticizing, like, there's always been SEC bias. Someone talked about Vegas lines and how Vegas would respond. And I think people need to understand the SEC historically, at least for the past 20 years, has been the dominant conference. Like, and we're not debating that. We're debating right now. Like, right now, as we are watching football, if you were to tell me, like, objectively, that you watched the Georgia-Texas game or the Georgia-Alabama game and you thought either of those games showcased that those 2 teams were better than Ohio State and Oregon, I don't know what you're watching. Because
you're just biased. You don't understand football if you're watching that. You say that.
There was objectively bad football in both of those football games. There were certainly bad plays in the Ohio State-Oregon game, but overall, and I'm not the only one saying this, like, you talk to different analysts who have watched the game and broken down the film, they sat and watched that game and thought, this is probably the number 1 and number 2 team in the country. But it took a loss from Texas for Oregon to be ranked number 1 this week, which is dumb, quite honestly. Because, by the way, Oregon probably has the 2 best wins of anybody in Ohio State and Boise.
Yeah. No, I agree. Thanks, Doug. JR nailed it. They don't know football. Appreciate you, Doug. I think that wraps it up for us. Larry, unless you have any additional thoughts, I think we're done here.
No, nothing.
All right. Larry, why don't you tell people when they can find Night Watch at?
Guys, search Night Watch, Larry K. I actually have the link to it. I'll put it in the chat. So you guys click that link, go to Night Watch, I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So if you guys hung out with us all night, listen to me speak, like the accent, whatever it is, click that link and subscribe to Night Watch. And if you're listening on the podcast or you see this later, type in Night Watch Larry K into your search bar in YouTube. Go over there, subscribe. I do Big Ten talk, have different guests on from all different teams in the Big Ten and beyond, actually. And we talk about matchups and things. I also do basketball in addition to football. So, you get a lot of Rutgers intel over there and just good conversation. I really appreciate anybody's support. Appreciate you guys listening to us all night tonight and giving me the platform. Appreciate both of you guys for having me on. It's always a pleasure. I'll be back. But that's where you can find me. And I hope to see you guys over on Night Watch.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Zach, Big Ten football talk. Tell people where they can find it. What's coming up?
Yep, Thursday mornings. I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing Thursday morning. So what we'll find. I am curious about the SEC Big Ten challenge that's been proposed, and we'll probably do some more deep dives into different programs. But yeah, so you can follow me Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and yeah, thanks for real quick. I just want to clarify. Fisherman made a comment that Georgia had the 2 best wins, Clemson and Texas, and I was like, that's a good point. That those are the 2 best wins, but I think Oregon has claim to number 2 on that, and they don't have a loss. So, but I want to give Fisherman his props. So
there you go. All right. Very good, everybody. Check me and Zach out over on the Ohio State channel of the Voice of College Football for our call-in show at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. I'll also be on the Voice of College Football Big Ten channel. So if you're watching that on here, I'll be on there tomorrow at 8 o'clock with Darren. We'll be talking Big Ten stuff. So check us out tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, if you want more Big Ten content. And like I said, call-in show, Ohio State channel. We don't just talk Ohio State. If you want to talk other Big Ten stuff, that's fine too. Just don't call in and give us a wrestling promo. That happened last time, and we're good on our wrestling promos. No more needed after that.
Oh man, I was working on mine.
Yeah. Well, you can, Zach, but
no, you don't want that. You don't want that.
Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. We appreciate it. Thank you for listening. If you're a podcast listener, we appreciate you listening after the fact as well. Thanks everybody. Have a good one.
Good night.